Hello, everyone. Today, my group and I will be delving into our chosen research question: obedience or morality, which one shall prevail in a principal agent relationship? The objective of this question and presentation encourages you to reflect and understand several key points. First, the general analysis of obedience to authority and the question of morality, the principal agent problem, with this, the stakeholder versus shareholder relationship and responsibility, the social responsibilities of a business, and answering whether the goal should always be profit centered. The case of Michigan Supreme Court, Dodge v. Ford Motor, will be used to prove a point. And lastly, the importance of implementing a well rounded company culture. All these objectives are linked to some of the major issues we've discussed in class, including stakeholder shareholder relationship, corporate social responsibility, obedience to authority, the Milgram experiment, Stanford prison experiment, the Eichmann case, and the importance of company culture. We've set out to use these topics to answer our research question, and we hope you enjoy our findings.
As our research focuses on the study on obedience to authority in conflict with morality, we will be examining three cases. The first one is the Milgram experiment, which was a social psychology experiment conducted to measure humans' obedience to authority figures, where men from 20 to 50 years old from a diverse range of occupation and level of education were asked to obey an authority figure, instructed them to perform an act conflicting with their personal conscience. So, particularly, participants were led to believe that they were assisting an unrelated experiment in which they had to administer electric shock to a learner, and these fake electric shock gradually increased, the intensity increased to the level that it would have been fatal had they been real. And the experiment found that unexpectedly, a very high portion of subjects would fully obey the instruction, even though initially they would more or less reluctant. The second study that we'll be focusing on would be the Stanford prison experiment, which was a role play and simulation intended to examine the effects of the situation on participants' reactions and behavior. The experiment called for participants to divide into two groups of prisoners and prison guards, where the guards were encouraged to control the prisoners. However, the study was cancelled after 6 days, as some guards exhibited abusive behavior toward prisoners, and this result perfectly aligned with the Milgram experiment. And last but not least, we'll be examining the Eichmann case, which followed a Nazi administrator who led more than 1.5 million Jews to their death. The man was the product of a system that brainwashed people into believing, into obeying orders, even if it was morally wrong, and involved a life and death matter of like millions of people. All in all, these studies point out to the same direction, which illustrate the ease in which ordinary people like us could be led to engage in antisocial acts by putting them in situation where they feel anonymous, or they could perceive other in a way that make them less than human or as enemy or objects. So for the purpose of this study, we will focus on the relationship between the principal and the agent, which create a principal agent problem when morality is involved in the question. So the principal agent problem is conceptually a conflict in priority between a person or a group and the representative authorized to act on their behalf. The problem can occur in many situations, from the relationship between a client and a lawyer to the relationship between the stockholder and a CEO. And so our focus would be on the relationship between the shareholders and the agent. In this case, would be the managers and the stakeholders, who are the people on the recipient side of every corporate decision. It goes without saying that in a relationship between the principal and the agent, the principal always has more authority over the agent. And so in this case, the shareholder are the authority figures to the managers. Morality can be a dilemma in this case when the shareholders decide on something that is morally wrong and could negatively affect or put the stakeholder at risk. In this case, the agent or possibly the managers are stuck between following their obligation and doing what is right. Reflecting from the three cases that we mentioned previously, the manager would be very susceptible to obey the shareholders against their conscience. So another question that we brought forth is how can the dilemma be resolved? And the solution that we come up with is either by making the incentive to obey the order seems less attractive, or to create a bigger incentive for the agent to follow morality over profit. And in this way, the morality, the thoughts, and the action will be more aligned. And so cognitive dissonance would be less likely to happen.
So, regarding the moral and social responsibility of corporations, social corporate responsibility is a crucial part of business ethics, and a responsible organization considers and recognizes the impact that its decisions and activities have on society and the environment. It is an expectation that organizations will not exploit people or the environment in the pursuit of profit, behaving and conducting business ethically and with sensitivity towards social, cultural, economic, and environmental issues. But as we have seen in class, ethical behavior is not always upheld. An interesting case that actually argues in favor of our question, should corporations solely be profit centered, was the Dodge versus Ford Motor Company case of 1919. Dodge, the plaintiffs in the case, and the shareholders to Ford Motor Company brought an action against Ford to force them to pay a more substantial dividend. Ford had brought their car prices down from $900 to $360 with the intention to spread the benefits of an industrialized society. But this, of course, negatively impacted short-term profits. The issue, therefore, was whether the Dodge brothers could force Ford into increasing the cost of the product and limit the money invested into expansion in order to pay a higher dividend. The court held that the brothers were entitled to a more equitable sized dividend because the rule of law asserted that the purpose of a corporation is to indeed make a profit for the shareholders. Regardless of this, the court decided not to interfere with price setting or the decision of a business expansion. As such, the court held that Henry Ford had to operate the Ford Motor Company in the interest of its shareholders, rather than in a charitable manner for the benefit of its employees or customers, so the stakeholders. In line with this, the question of whether a company should solely be profit-centered is one that lies in the positive. However, if we further reflect and analyze the reasoning of the ruling, the court disregarded judgment on the decision-making process of Ford. Ford's altruistic intention for business expansion was rooted to benefit society, or stakeholders, to reap the benefits of industrialization and take part in it. To this extent, the judgment does not necessarily only consider profit making as the only goal of business, but instead we can take it as highlighting the importance of corporate social responsibility and its deviation from the idea that a corporation's goal should solely be profit-centered. In the last decade, empirical research has brought evidence of the measurable payoff of corporate social responsibility initiatives to companies as well as the shareholders. CSR refers to the ensemble of policies, practices, investments, and concrete results deployed and achieved by a business corporation in the pursuit of its stakeholders' interests, and there are many reasons why a company should be attentive to them. Amongst many others, reducing costs and risk, gaining competitive advantage, developing and maintaining legitimacy and reputational capital, and achieving win-win outcomes through synergistic value creation all encourage ethical corporate behavior. The matter of forced obedience to authority here always puts the judgment of morality into question. But where corporate responsibility and reputation stands on the line, ethical behavior is expected to become more prominent. Jeroen van der Meer, Committee of Managing Directors of Shell Company, stated, "In my view, the successful companies of the future will be those that integrate business and employees' personal values. The best people want to do work that contributes to society with a company whose values they share, where their actions count and their views matter. The integration of business and employees' personal values are what will allow forced obedience to authority to be minimized."
Obeying clearly harmful, whether causing physical harm or causing intangible harm, orders from superiors is not as straightforward as it seems. As we have seen from the examples given by my colleagues, one of the more important things that we have seen in recent years is the increasing trend in the number of business crises when they are exposed to the public for malpractice within their business. We have seen examples before, such as the Eichmann case, the Milgram experiment, or from the Stanford experiment, how average people could be put in the position where they are obeying orders to hurt another person by their superiors. These forms of obedience can be carried over into the professional life and the business sphere, as employees are all the time being put in positions where they are following orders from their bosses. They're not always looking over their shoulders and revising an order before following through and executing the task at hand. And almost always it is assumed that the superior is in the right. While this is largely how the dynamic is between most employee-manager relationships, over the span of the last couple of years, a much larger importance has been placed on corporate culture within a company and how a solid foundation to the company through its corporate culture would prevent corporate malpractice from taking place in many of these companies. As we can see, the corporate culture of a company is formed through numerous different layers that conjoin to complete it. The section of the corporate culture that we will be shifting our focus to is the corporate values and beliefs. The values of the company are those concepts that the company holds very deep in the core functioning of all its departments. The values of a company somehow define what the company is like to people in and outside of the firm. The more ingrained the values of the company are, the more accustomed people are to get their way or style of work. Examples of values that are vital to the company as they help people trust the firm, especially as it is not just artificial values that are written on the wall of a company's office, but it is visible whenever employees in the business work together in order to reach the decision or are negotiating, or if an outsider is conducting business with any person within the organization. He should be able to detect the company culture from these interactions and is likely to make an impression that the third party would make a general impression of the company and therefore spread the reputation of what it is like to work with these firms. While values are usually not something that companies make public, the best way to make sure that you are doing a good job is if you are following the rules correctly and the third parties realize that you are an ethical company and that you have like the trends of how people interact within your business with other people is constant and they are all following ethical guidelines. Alright, so now we will go through some of the conclusions of what we've talked about so far. To start off with, in a principal-agent relationship, we will ask ourselves the questions that we started off with. Does morality prevail over obedience to authority or not? Well, until now, there is no clear answer to this question. Obviously, we'd all like to think that morality would prevail over thoughtless and straightforward obedience to unethical orders. However, in real-life application, this is simply not the case. This is due to several reasons. One of the reasons is the presence of the incentive schemes that is currently in place. And this motivates a form of behavior that is seen from employees, as we have seen in the cases. These cases exemplify the potential effects of forced obedience and how it can affect the agent-principal relationship in these companies. However, recently, with the increasing notice companies and customers are taking towards how companies they buy from function, including the utilization of corporate social responsibility and globalization. These companies have been paying more care day by day to ensuring that the corporate governance structure put in place ensures that there is no misuse of power among the corporate ladder, and to make sure that their employees are responsible and transparent with their actions throughout the whole corporate ladder, whether to their subordinates or their superiors. In addition to financial compensation packages put in place by these companies must try and not encourage shady behavior by the employees. An example would be not only to incentivize based on financial performance, as we have seen before, as this encourages unethical accounting workarounds by some of the accountants of these firms, and this results in them illegally manipulating the company records. Thank you for listening carefully to our presentation, and below we have some questions that we'd like to further discuss with you guys and know your opinion on.